Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you are a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission worker. All right, my guest today is C. I have actually spoken with C on a different podcast, and if you missed that, that was the To Become One podcast about transitioning into being married and being on support and all that good stuff. But that's really not the focus of today's conversation. I invited her back to speak really on a topic that we hear a lot of questions about, and that's referrals. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to pretend that referrals are an easy thing. I think it's a lot of work. And it's interesting, we don't pre-rehearse these podcasts. You know, even as C and I were kicking around some things, she started thinking of a bunch of questions that she had for me as well. And so what we decided to do is really just turn on the mic and interview each other and get each other's opinions. I don't think that I would call myself, and I don't think C would call herself, the expert on support raising. And yet it would be dishonest if we said that we both haven't been exposed to quite a bit on this topic. We both had the blessing and the opportunity to lean in and coach other support raising missionaries from all over the globe. So it's an honor to have C with me again today. So C, hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. At the time that we're recording this, I know that you are living stateside. You have lived in, we'll just say, the East before, and you intend to move globally again in the future. But that's not really the focus of our conversation today. It's really, we want to talk about referrals and the messy thing that is, and yet also the wonderful thing that is. And so let's just jump in with a conversation that we started on our previous podcast. You had mentioned that your husband, well, you know, I tell you what, why don't you reset that whole situation, because that's a fascinating thing that he did in becoming fully funded.
Okay. So my husband did not grow up in the U.S. He moved to the U.S. for college, and then while in college learned about God's heart for the world and decided he wanted to be a part of that and go into ministry. So he began doing fundraising, but for him that was a really difficult process because he didn't have a large pool of people that he had grown up knowing or a church body that he had been in since he was a child. He had the people he had met in a couple of years. So he began asking for referrals, and he actually, before becoming fully funded, was in his fourth generation of referral before someone actually asked him on an appointment, "How did you get my number?" And he walked them back through the four people that connected them.
Wow. Now, fourth generation, for some people, they've not done referrals yet. They're kind of freaking out. So what do you mean by, I mean, I know, but for the sake of the listener, explain that if you would, please.
Sure.
What does that mean, generations of referrals?
So it was the line of people that continued from the first person he knew. So he started with someone, let's call them Joe, and he met with Joe, had a support appointment with Joe, and invited Joe to be on his ministry partner team. And Joe said yes or no, whatever his response. My husband then said, "Do you know anyone else who'd be willing to sit down and hear about what I'm doing and potentially partner with me?" Mm-hmm. And, you know, Joe obviously said yes, and he referred my husband to the next person, and he repeated that process through four different people.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome. And so one of the questions that I get frequently is, do you ask for that referral in the same meeting? Do you go back later on? Now, I know I have my opinion. I'll be willing to answer this as well, but I'd love to hear your thoughts first of all. When do you ask for that referral?
So that was actually one of my questions for you as well. So it will be helpful for you to answer.
Okay, you do the best that you can, and I'll do the best that I can, and we'll just leave it to God to sort it out for everybody listening.
Okay, so I think for me, in my season right now being stateside, I do think it's a little different because I don't have a strict timeline that I'm trying to get overseas. Mm-hmm. So I would say now it probably would be easier for me to have an initial appointment and then later to set up another referral appointment.
Okay.
I think for someone who's trying to launch in 3 or 4 months, it's difficult to initially even get that first appointment.
Sure.
So to try to get a second is difficult. And so typically as I'm coaching women who are raising funds, I coach them to do their presentation, give their ask to join the team, invite people to be on the team, and then after they answer, depending on the person's answer, to say there's actually another way that you could help me and partner with me, and then they introduce the idea of referrals.
Okay. So we gotta trade off, right? So my context is usually people who are in the U.S. that are raising support, whether they're staying in the U.S. or going globally, and that is usually a similar answer where I will say, you know what, first and foremost though, get their answer for themselves personally. So they need to be a yes or a no for your team, and it can be a yes or a no before you even bring up the concept of referrals, because I don't want them thinking about too many things. And I even had somebody once who's like, well, I don't know if I can support you financially, but I'll tell you what, I'll give you some names. And they try to replace prayer and financial support with, I'm just going to give you some referrals. That's not really what I want on the front side. On the front side, I want that person to prayerfully consider, are they supposed to step into being on my team? And that's really the only thing I want them considering.
Yes.
Because that's so easy to kind of skip past that, and we just know that once people skip past that, they don't come back to it. Or we can help, or we can try to get them back to it, but that ship has sailed probably. So I will, as someone who's fully funded, who has on occasion needed to raise additional support because of cost of living and cost of ministry and all that kind of stuff, I don't want to ask for referrals in that same meeting. I just want them to be a part of my team, and I'm inviting them towards that. That being said, once they've made a very clear answer, yes or no, which that's not always even in that meeting, I do feel a freedom to call somebody up. In fact, I have a friend named Jeremy, I don't even mind using his name, who he and his wife are fantastic. And I could tell they wanted to join my team. So much so that to tell me no, they took me back out to coffee to sit me down to tell me no, because they loved what I'm doing and they want to be a part of it. But they had to say, hey, actually, as you are doing this ministry, we are genuinely going to pray for you. And actually, we're thankful that you asked us, because it caused us to look at our budget, and we realized we're actually going in the whole $200 a month, and we have been for a while. We haven't been paying attention, and we're financially a little bit in crisis. We didn't even know that. And so thank you for just inviting us. The answer is yes to praying, and it's no for now on the financial side, but we're going to make that change down the road a bit. And so I've actually been able to stay in contact with them, and I would consider them on my team, even though financially they haven't been able to. But I'll tell you what, I then say, there is another way you could help. Would you be willing to? And I walked them through a process of setting up referrals, and multiple people joined my team from that conversation. I mean, so you talk about a generation. He gave me, I don't recall exactly, I want to say 10 names, and the batting average is a little higher than normal from that. Several people of those 10 names did join my team.
Wow.
So all that being said, if I could almost like write that as an equation, it would be, number one is invite that person and focus on that first and foremost. Number two, after you have a clear decision, let them know, hey, there is another way that you could help. And then part three would be go through that referral process, which that's a little bit different of a conversation. We can talk about that too. But within a U.S. context, I prefer to say, there's no way you could help. I'd like to sit back down with you and talk about kind of referrals and who you might know that also might be excited about this ministry and how God's using it to change lives. Let's get together next week again. Let me buy you coffee again. And I more continue the conversation, because that referral process, that can bring up a whole bunch of emotions and concerns, and then you get the actual do I share a contact card with you? Do I write out name? There's this work element to it. So I prefer to put that off. Yes. Does that make sense?
Yes. And I think that is one of the biggest, that the emotions and feelings you were saying that it brings up for people, I think that is one of the reasons asking for referrals or even being given referrals is a difficult process, because there are a lot of emotions that go with that.
Oh, yeah.
Before I was married, I had a roommate, and she was also a single girl, and she was in the business world, and I had asked her, hey, what would you think about giving me some referrals? And we lived together, so it's obviously a little more casual than having an appointment, sitting down and asking her. But we were discussing referrals, and she said to me that in the past she had actually given a missionary referrals, and that missionary took the names and went to those people and asked them to join their team. And when the referrals said no, the missionary began to almost badger the referrals
and abuse them a little bit.
Yes, and explain why they shouldn't be saying no, and explain that they should come on their team. And it was those referrals came back to my roommate and said, why did you give our information to that person?
That's the definition of being burned with referrals right there.
Yes.
That's the one thing everybody hopes never happens.
Right.
And a lot of times when people say no to giving referrals, that right there is exactly what they're anticipating or fearing.
Yes.
That would happen. By the way, this is the first time I've actually heard, or not the first time, it's the first time in a long time I've heard about that actually happening. That's exceedingly rare, but that is a concern that people have.
It is. I do think it is rare. That's the only time I've ever heard of that happening. But I know that naturally that is probably people's fear when someone says, hey, can you connect me with your closest people?
Right.
They're thinking, oh, well, what are you going to do with those people?
Right.
And so I think you kind of were alluding to this earlier, but that it is a process to talk through referrals with people. And I really do like to explain, hey, this in no way commits anyone to giving. I would just like to sit down with them and talk through this ministry and see if they want to come on board and be a part of it.
Right there, you said something that I think is huge. When you're asking for the referral, you explain to the person a little bit about the process. In fact, I don't think it's bad for you to say, hey, I just want to let you know, I'm going to call anybody you give me their name, I'm going to call them, but I'm also going to tell them that you did not promise that they have to bring their checkbook or anything like that. I'm simply wanting to tell them about the ministry vision and how God's using this to change lives, and the budget goals, and connect with them. That's it. And I'll invite them to be a part, but if they don't want to be a part, I'm not going to call them again. I'm not going to badger them. I'm not going to say, John Doe said you would. Like, there's going to be none of that. It's going to be more of just like you and I first had our first coffee, or whatever. Like, and I think that's important because you're borrowing on their trust. And I know that's mentioned in the God Ask. The book is The God Ask by Steve Shadrach. Probably a lot of people listening to this have read that. If you haven't, we think it's one of the best books you can read on support raising. You're borrowing on somebody's trust, on their credibility. And some people feel that a lot more than others, to the point that I had a guy that he totally knows me, financial supporter. His son and my sons won a state championship together in baseball. So we have been around each other for years. I wasn't even asking him for a referral. I was asking him for a phone number for somebody, and he refused. And I said, wait, what's going on? He said, I don't give phone numbers to anybody for anything. He goes, that's burned me before. I'm not doing it. And I was like, whoa, this is somebody who totally trusts me. And yet he's not doing it. And so most people aren't going to be that extreme. And yet you do need to alleviate some of those often unstated concerns that people have by saying, hey, I'm going to handle your friendship really carefully. And you giving me their phone number is not you saying they're going to join my financial team. That's only you saying they might be interested in hearing more about this ministry that's changing lives. That's it. And I'm simply going to call them and ask them if they want to get coffee and share with them about this stuff. And that's between them and Jesus, whether they get a part of it or not. But you're going to know people that I'm not going to know. We'll say you're a dentist. I don't know anybody in the dentist world. But if we're going to continue to work on this vision that God's given us, and that you're excited about, whether they've joined your team or not, I'm going to need to meet people that aren't currently in my circle. Even taking a couple of minutes to explain that to you, C, it has really, it's taken a couple of minutes of time because it is sensitive. And we want people to trust us. And yet at the end of the day, we need to get names and phone numbers.
Right.
And we need to be able to borrow their credibility and call someone and say, hey, John Doe thought you might be interested in hearing more about this ministry that he's a part of with me, or about this ministry that he likes. Could we get together? I'd love to share with you about the vision and the financial goals and how God's using this to change lives. Could we grab coffee next Thursday at 9 o'clock over on your side of town? And that credibility right there, not everybody's going to say yes, but a lot of people are going to go, oh, okay. If John Doe says you're legit. Friend of John Doe's a friend of mine, or whatever.
Right. I think that handling it delicately is a great way to put it. I think sometimes, especially single women, so I was living on support for almost 8 years as a single woman, and then recently was married. And I think a lot of times we get into the actual appointment with potential financial partners and we're nervous. Even if we're excited, it can make you nervous to ask someone to partner with you. And it is God who provides. It's not really anything to do with individuals. But I think that when we're asking someone, hey, would you want to be a part of this ministry, a part of my team, and someone to in the God Ask, he talks about asking and then zipping your lip and just listening and waiting. I think those moments can be some of the most nerve-wracking moments as a support raiser.
Sure.
I wish that weren't true, but I just think it is true for most people.
At least early on.
Yes.
Over time, and not that I'm normal, I don't know what normal is. Now it doesn't bother me at all. Just being honest. Now I'm just like, dude, this is between them and Jesus. My job is to invite. They can say no, and I'm not heartbroken. They could say yes, and I'm not going to be overexcited. I'm just glad to be obedient to ask them. Yes. But that wasn't day one coming out of boot camp or training. Right. It took me a while to kind of get to that perspective. So.
Right. And I've even told people, sometimes you can sense people are uncomfortable because they know you're about to ask them. Right. And I've been able to tell them, hey, it's okay. If you aren't on board with this. And just not in a way that we're giving people an out, not that we're making the ask a softer ask.
Yeah, do you want to be careful about that? You're right.
That's very rare that I do say that. But sometimes you can sense that, and you need to also be aware of who you're talking with. Yeah. But I think that walking people through that process, sometimes we want to rush through the ask for a referral because I don't know if we're afraid. We're nervous, probably. Yeah, right? If it's nervous, we're afraid, or we're just ready for the meeting to be over, or maybe we have another meeting and we're in a hurry. I don't know what it is, but sometimes we aren't patient with that explanation, or we assume that people we're meeting with know what we're asking. Right. And a lot of times they don't.
By the way, that is why I prefer to set up a separate meeting with the person. I can say, hey, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how you might be able to introduce me to some others that might also be interested in this ministry, but I want to do it in a way that you're comfortable with. And that's just going to take a conversation and some time. So rather than trying to do that right now, we've already been sitting here for 45 minutes. Thanks again for joining my team, blah, 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 or whatever else. I really try and move that down the road a little bit. And when we come back together, they already know what we're going to talk about. They already have some reservations because they probably thought about it since then. I'm able to speak to that. Yeah. And, it can take 30 or 45 minutes just to get referrals. But I'll tell you, I usually can get these days, I don't need to do it very often, I'm fully funded, but I can get 15 referrals or so sitting down with someone. And it's significant. But it does take time. It is its own meeting. And I definitely speak to some of those concerns and some of those same things that you were talking about. Let's talk about that a little bit, though. So the concerns that people have. So people sometimes are like, I want to call them first and make sure that it's okay if you call them. You and I both know that doesn't usually work out so well. Right. Why do you think that kind of crashes and burns when people try and do that that pre-call. I'm not saying it'll never work. We're not like painting it as impossible, but more often than not, we hear time and time again, that doesn't work so well. Why do you think that doesn't?
I think the biggest reason is it's not their priority. They're not trying to get fully funded so they can begin their ministry. And so I think there are probably other little things that go into it also, is, maybe they are fearful to make that call.
Oh, sure.
There's probably a lot of things, but I think the number one thing is it's not the top thing on their priority list, and people are busy.
Right. Good.
What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I was thinking, that's certainly true what you just said, but also I don't think anybody can explain the work I do like I can explain the work I do. And it puts my, we'll call him friend, because again, not everybody who gives you a referral is going to be a supporter. It puts them in an awkward spot if their friend's like, well, who is he? Well, what does he do? Well, I already support missions in Africa. Oh, well, no, he's not actually in Africa. He's helping train leaders that are in Africa. But it puts them in this weird spot where they're supposed to explain something that they're not. And I had a friend that I love, this guy, I've known him forever. I actually introduced him and his wife, and I performed their wedding, so they totally trust me.
Right.
And we got in this awkward spot where I asked him for referrals. Well, I really want to call him. I was like, yeah, sure. And over time, I'm talking months, it became clear I wasn't going to get any referrals from him, and he intended to. And then also he made phone calls, and when he did make phone calls, he got in awkward situations where people are like, yeah, I don't know if I want you to give him my number and blah, blah, blah. And so generally speaking, we know it's not impossible, but you're gonna bat a real low batting percentage if you try that route. So see, I know that one of the things that I've written, you asked me about this because I wrote an article on it too, but we have moved towards, with Support Raising Solutions, is encouraging people to get contact information and then actually ask the person who's referring to just send a kind of a heads up text, not a phone call, not even asking for permission, but just something like, hey, my friend C is a part of a ministry that's changing lives. I've encouraged her to give you a call. I hope you can grab coffee with her. Something like short and sweet, like that's the kind of only heads up that they give people. And man, we keep hearing that works well. Yes. We keep hearing from people. In fact, when they get replies to the text, usually it's like, oh, thank you, looking forward to meeting C. Yeah. It's like, we don't really, not that it's impossible, but we rarely hear from someone that's like, I didn't give you permission to send my contact information. In fact, I haven't heard of that yet. I'm sure it'll happen at some point. But generally, people are really warm to that. As you coach people that are in that process and they're getting referrals and they're going through that, speak to how well that works or doesn't work, or why you advise that, or I want to hear your perspective.
I think that I really love that idea. And I actually used that personally a year ago when I was in the process of fundraising and trying to get some referrals. I had a friend who lives out of state, and I said, hey, I'm wanting to come on a support raising trip. But I don't know very many people where he lives. But I have several people who are on my team in the area. And so I called my friend and I said, hey, here's what I'm doing. I'm looking for some referrals. Here's what I'm kind of thinking. Would you be willing to give me a list of names, but also to text them and let them know that I'm going to be calling them?
Okay.
And he said yes. And so I wrote the text out for him, similar to what you just said.
Okay, yeah.
And he said...
By the way, let's just say that's super helpful for people if you can give them a template. You can give them permission to change it if they want. But giving them a simple, 3-sentence template of, hey, kind of just what I said a couple minutes ago, hey, my friend C is a part of a ministry that's changing lives. I've encouraged her to give you a call. I hope you can grab coffee when she does. Something like that's really simple. And so you gave him kind of a template, and I guess he used it?
He used it, and I think there were 2 people who responded to his message that said, hey, that's great. I think they knew the idea that I was in ministry and I was doing fundraising.
Okay.
And they did say, hey, we can't join her team right now. Just off the bat. I had never even talked with these people. And he told me that, and I said, well, would it still be okay if I contacted them even if they can't come on my team?
Sure.
That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I would love to meet them. They may know someone.
They might pray. You can build a relationship. And yeah, you're right. They might know someone, but also... As I know I've had this happen to me, and I'm guessing it happened to you. I've had people that they gave me a pre-no, and then Jesus got involved, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, by the way, we're not a no, we're actually a yes. So
yes, and so there was actually one girl in particular who I tried to contact her, and she said, I'm just really busy. I have this, this and that going on. There's just no way I can meet with you. And I said, I totally understand. Maybe next time.
Okay.
And she said, great. And then I ended up actually scheduling a meeting with her then boyfriend, who my friend also connected me with.
Okay.
And she came on that appointment.
Oh, really?
Which was fine. It was great for me to meet her. Actually, when I lived overseas, her boyfriend lived overseas as well in the same country as me. And so I knew him.
Okay.
But she came, I got to meet her. We had a meeting, and she said, I really love what you're doing, and I'm going to look at my budget and try to figure out a way that I can come on your team.
Praise the Lord.
And that was just really encouraging to me. And I hope that encourages others to be persistent without being, aggressive in any way. There was no hard feelings. It was very just natural.
Right. By the way, just from a context point of view, I mentioned there's an article on the SRS website about referrals that I wrote a while back, and that does talk about some of this stuff. A little bit formulaic, which, to be honest, I'm not super comfortable with. Like, I really kind of like that, spiritually healthy stuff. It's not just this program out of a box kind of thing. And there is something about having a healthy process that you've really thought about and worked out. So we're not usually super prescriptive. And even that article, I wouldn't say it's the most perfect thing ever. However, at the time that it was written, and at the moment where we're recording, we're hearing from people that are like, thank you, that is helping me so much, because it's hard. In fact, would you say that most people who are fresh out of training in support raising, that they're ready to ask for referrals?
No.
Yeah. Why is that, you think?
It's a great question.
I'm putting on the spot. Like I said, we do not pre-rehearse this.
I think, I think the biggest thing I've seen with our girls, that all of the staff that I'm coaching have gone to the SRS boot camp.
Okay.
And when they come out of training, they are well trained, and it's like they have all the tools, but they don't know how to use them yet.
Right.
And so just the idea of getting an appointment and giving an ask and having someone come on their team is like the ultimate exciting thing.
And they almost can't think about anything else.
And it's really, they have trouble remembering to even think about referrals. And so each week I'm saying, hey, how's your contact list? Have you been getting referrals? And they're like, oh, I forgot I'm supposed to be doing that.
Right.
And that's fine.
Meanwhile, their contact list is getting smaller.
Right.
Smaller and smaller.
Right. So we're working on that, and thankfully our staff do have a support coach to help them think through that. I know that's not true for everyone.
Right. Yeah.
So I do think it's important that people have accountability partners or someone to just ask them that question. But
I took Taekwondo as a young child, and I was a white belt, and then I was an orange belt, and I was a green belt, and I was a blue belt, and then I didn't actually test for my black. My dojo closed. But all that being said, if I were to equate MPD, Ministry Partner Development and Support Raising, as like this belt system, if you will, asking for referrals, it's definitely not the white belt. It's the sort of thing that it is a developed skill. You only do it by doing it. You only get good at it by doing it. You got to be really humble, really teachable, willing to tweak what you're doing and how you're doing it, and read up on it and listen up on it, and it's work. And yet, if you're ever going to get to black belt, so to speak, that's going to happen probably through some misstarts, some misfires, and yet over time, it really is awesome to sit down with someone who you've never met before, and somebody else just referred you to them, and tell them about how God's using your ministry to change lives, and have them get super excited. Sometimes right in front of you.
Right.
Get super excited and be like, that is awesome. Yeah, we're totally going to join your team. And I have completely had that happen a handful of times. And I would say at this point, I don't know about you, C, but I would say roughly a third of my team are people that started as referrals, maybe even half.
Yes. I think what you were just saying, I tell the girls that I'm coaching, some of my favorite meetings are with referrals because they don't have any context of what I'm doing or what our ministry is doing before meeting me. So I get to be the person to tell them for the first time, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's how the world is being changed and how God is working. And it's really so encouraging for my heart to watch people get excited about that. And have you experienced that, Aaron?
Yeah, I have. In fact, I would say too that I don't know how to say this exactly, but in some ways it's easier to ask somebody I don't know to join my team. And I know that kind of freaks people out. Like, no, I just want to sit down with people I've already known forever so that it's not uncomfortable. Yeah. And just over time, I've gone, actually it's the other way for me.
Yes, me too.
Because there is absolutely no love and no relationship lost if they're not interested. It's just like, okay, nice to meet you. The end. Whereas right now, interestingly, I had a guy who there was not too long ago, I always need to add a little extra a wrinkle on my support, and I sat down with a guy who said, I'll give you a really clear answer in a few days. And when I followed up with him, he didn't give me a clear answer. He kind of pushed me off. I was like, okay, that was weird. So I don't know what's going on here. I'll follow up again in a few days. And I did it a few times, and finally at one point, he just said, hey, Aaron, I'm really clear. We'll let you know if and when we want to give. Which that is not what he had said in our meeting. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. Well, here's the deal. I run into this guy every now and then. Just our lives overlap now and again. And so I was like, you know what? He set the boundary. That's that. That's fine. But now there's this relational dynamic that's been there that if it was a referral, somebody that I'd never met before wouldn't be there. Somebody that's not already in my life that wouldn't be there. Well, it's been there with him. Now, I do think God has used that in his heart and mind. I don't have all the details. I know that recently he and I were both somewhere with a mutual friend who was moving overseas with missions. And he and I were in the same room praying over this person. And I was like, it's not my job to even bring it up. And I can't read guilt in people's eyes, but the dude looked guilty. That's all I can say. And I wasn't putting anything else on him. When he basically told me to stop, I stopped because I was like, hey, I did my job. I invited him. And what was interesting is a few days later, a large check showed up in the mail.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, God, I don't know what you're doing in his heart and mind. That's kind of weird and yet awesome. So I'm thankful for it, but also like now I need to follow up. And it's this weird thing. But I guess all that little like mini soap opera drama I just shared, that doesn't exist with a referral.
Right.
With a referral, it's nice to meet you. Here's how God's changing lives. Here's the vision. Would you like to be a part? And if they say no, it's like, hey, it was nice to meet you. And if they say yes, they're a part. But I'm not going to run into them at church or at the coffee shop or anything else very often. So I actually like the referral process now. But again, I don't know what color of like karate belt I have. But I'm up there in the reference world. I have a nice colored karate belt, I guess you could say. What are some of the other questions or concerns or things that have come up about referrals with some of the ladies that you get to work with?
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. Coming from the other side of the world, if you're overseas and you're coming home, similar to me even when I was overseas for 6 years, I came home, I really didn't have a large pool of people that were new to me to ask to join my team. I think I was curious what your advice would be for someone coming back either for a furlough or maybe a transition between organizations needing referrals. They can't sit down and have an appointment exactly like we talked about earlier.
Right.
So what advice would you give?
So number one, I would probably advise them, and actually I have a friend who just went through this, who lives in South Africa. I mean, he just went through this, and I walked with him through this process recently. He's gone from 20% funded to 80% funded over the last probably 6 months. It did involve him doing some work before he came back to the U.S. to kind of set some stuff up. And then he needed to go back to Africa for a time, but it's also requiring a second trip. So he'll be coming back at the time of recording. He'll be coming back 2 months from now. Okay. And he's actively doing that again right now, this referral process. And so in his context, in his situation, what I've walked through with him and what I believe he has learned and I have learned as someone who's coaches and trains others is that he needs to not put that off until he gets back to the States. And so in his context, time zone's way off from central US to South Africa. It's massively different. But mornings and nights is when he needs to do some real work with people who are already on his support team, or people who aren't but trust him. And he needs to do some Zoom or Skype or whatever video calls and really try and have that same appointment, like what we were just talking about that I might do here. But talk with someone like, hey, and by the way, some powerful words in the English language is, hey, there's another way that you could help. Could we talk? Set that up, set up a time, get together, unpack, like, so I need to come back to, we'll say Connecticut. I need to come back to Connecticut and raise another 20% because God's blessing our ministry, and yet we're not really thriving. We're really 20% from where we need to be. And in order to do that, I'm going to need to sit down with some people that I don't even know. And so I'm not saying that, you're promising me anybody's going to join my team that but I'd like to walk through a process with you. Could you help introduce me to 15 or 20 people that, and we can kind of talk about them right now over video call or whatever else, that I can begin a process of trying to set up some appointments with them for when I come back to Connecticut. And so you walk a person over video through the process of sharing contact, and it takes time. I don't love video calls at all, but and that, by the way, that's work time. That's out of your schedule, and so you might have to suspend some other duties that you have on the field wherever you're at globally, so that you don't start work till noon that day because you're going to be working until 10 o'clock that night, or or whatever else. But you really you treat it as work and an important part of your work. So you get those referrals, you get a bunch of names and phone numbers, but as you and I both know, that's just part of the process. So then the second thing is you might be getting up some days at 5 o'clock in the morning and you're making phone calls to people in Connecticut where you're like, hey, Jane Doe, my buddy John thought you might be interested in hearing more about this ministry he's a part of with me. I'm actually calling you from Africa right now. I'm only going to be in Connecticut for a few days coming up in January, but I would really love to get together with you and share with you kind of like what we call the sandwich analogy, share with you about the vision and our budget goals and how God's using this to change lives. Could I buy you a cup of coffee when I come back from Africa on January 7th or 8th? Is there an hour in there? So really, that's extra work. That's hard. But you're doing that. I believe it's possible, and I've seen it done on the front side to set up some of those appointments on the front side before you even hit town. And then as a caveat, you're shooting for being in Connecticut, we'll say for a week. You're front end loading up your appointments over a 3-day period so that once you're in town, you can continue to work and try and set up some other appointments while you're around. Or if somebody goes, I can't do it those 3 days. Well, I might be around a little bit later in the week. What about Thursday? So it's work. It's totally work. But I really do think a lot of that can be done wherever you're at in the world. And I realize there's places out in the bush that's less possible. But for the bulk of our audience, they are in places where they have internet. They have access to Skype and Zoom and WhatsApp and all that kind of stuff. But let me kind of push a question back on you, because usually when I start having this sort of conversation with somebody who's situated outside of the U.S. or our time zones, they start going, that's going to cost money. Like my data rates are a lot, or it cost me like 50 cents a minute to make a phone call from Africa, or they start giving me all these reasons why they shouldn't do it, and I usually have to like hold myself back from like jumping all over them. So how would you answer that if somebody were to go, for me to make all those phone calls, it's going to cost me $15?
Well, I would say it's worth the $15. I probably have a more similar view to you in that situation, where I think, gosh, it's worth the investment. Like, you're investing. It's not a loss to spend $15 or $20 or $50 because you're investing your time and your finances to be fully funded so that you can be fully invested in ministry time when you go back overseas. And I think that, yes, it is work, and and sometimes it's not our favorite part.
Right.
I don't actually know very many people who love making phone calls in any way in the same time zone.
Count me among those that despise it.
And so I think it's really, I don't love making phone calls. I love having appointments with people, but sitting down and dialing the number is one of the very hard moments of my day when I do fundraising. Yeah. And I think that honestly, we've joked about like CrossFit coaches being like good support coaches.
Yeah, they're great at accountability.
Well, I'm a CrossFit coach, and I think in some ways it's just like you just have to do it. Like you have to dial the number. You have to choose to spend the $15.
Between your CrossFit and my karate, I think we could go do a different podcast, but we're not going to do that.
But yeah, I think it's worth it. That's what I would tell people. You can't change people's minds to make them think that it's worth it until I think you do have to experience like, oh, I spent $15, but I set up 10 appointments and I had, another over, $1,000 monthly come in, and now we can go back and we're fully funded. It's like
was that
worth
it. $15?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest, it might not just be $15. It might be you have to download a couple of apps, you might have to get a program, you might need to get a good set of headphones so people can hear you. It's going to cost you time, it's going to cost you effort, it's going to cost you work. And $15, it might be $15 a day over, 5 days worth of work in a week, that could cost you a couple $100 that week. I mean, I don't know what it all costs, but at the end of the day, you're right on. Is that a good return on investment if you spend a few $100s and yet you pick up $1,000 or $2,000 a month worth of support? Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, and I think we're not really talking about this, but I do think it's the same principle for coming back home, wherever your home is. For us, it's the U.S., but even that investment of time and finances to pay for a plane ticket to come home to meet with those referrals. Yeah. I think it's very valuable.
Yeah.
And so...
and I'm going to push back on that. Sometimes people go, hey, referrals, I can just do that, like via video. Like I can do that via Skype, like from the other side of the world, right? You and I both know that, yes, it's possible that might work out for you, but also it's pretty improbable that's going to work out for you. That's a technology issue. That's also a time zone issue. That's also, they don't know your vision. They don't know what you're doing. So you're not that big of a priority on their list. So they're pretty disinclined to be like, yeah, I'm going to talk to this missionary. It's going to hit me up for money. Right. They're not going to do that. Whereas when you make it easy on them and you're like, hey, you're in Colorado Springs. I'm going to come through Colorado Springs. I'm going to come all the way from Africa and I'm going to try and sit down with you as a part of my trip if you'll commit to, at least just getting coffee with me. Could we try and do that on January 15th or whatever it is? If you make it easy on them, they're a lot more likely to get to hear about how God's changing lives and using your vision for ministry to do so.
And I think there is something special about sitting down and having a meal or having a cup of coffee. Like there's just something different when you do that than sitting on across from a computer screen. I mean, even this is kind of funny, but with my husband, we dated long distance. He was overseas and I was in America for the majority of our dating relationship. And even with us and in that relationship, we were close. But whenever we would see each other in person, after being away for 6 weeks or whatever, it's different. There's something different about being in person.
Yeah, so much warmer. So, the distractions aren't there. And
you really get to know someone.
Minesweeper on a different window that you can't see.
They're not like, texting or something while you can't see or sending emails. Like, you're really engaged. And I think it's just so worth it. I was going to ask you, Aaron, when you're, contacting the people on your team and asking them for the referrals, and what kind of timeline would you say? Like if someone was coming back to the States in December, when should they start that process?
Yeah, I would start it probably within a couple months because in my experience, and believe me, I'm very fallible, I can be wrong, but in my experience and my perspective, people are a little more willing to stick something on the calendar a couple months out if you're coming from the other side of the world. If you're in the US and you're like, hey, can I meet with you at Starbucks 2 months from now? They're like, why because you're calling me.
Yeah.
But if you're calling them from Australia or wherever it is you are, and you're like, hey, I'm trying to plan a trip to the U.S. and it's just, you're big. I know we haven't even met, but you're big on my list of priorities of people I'd like to connect with. Mm-hmm. And Charlie didn't promise me that you're going to jump on my support team or anything like that, but I do want to meet you. You're someone that he values, and so I'd love to connect with you and tell you about our ministry and the vision and our budget goals and how God's changing lives. If I'm able to swing through your city on Thursday, on this date, could we grab coffee? I realize this is a couple months out, but I'm like planning like my travel schedule, and I'd love to connect with you. Do you think you could be available that day? Mm-hmm. Well, I think a couple months out, with that sort of invitation, people are going to say, yeah, totally. I mean, how often do people get a phone call from someone from the other side of the world that's like, I want to meet with you?
Right.
And so you can kind of take advantage of the fact that you're a little bit of a unicorn in their life at that moment and be special, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, I think that you can do it pretty much almost any time up until you're there. And in fact, once you're there, let's say you didn't connect with that referral for some reason, and then you might not be able to. But I would only do this as after trying from overseas first as much as possible. But if I'm in town and I've had a shift in my calendar and someone said, oh, I'm just not around then, and blah, 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 and you're in town, it's a work trip. And so when you get a minute, you might reach out and, be like, hey, Charlie, looks like I'm going to be able to be in town actually through the weekend now. Just wanted to see any chance that, because you had said that you're out of town through Friday, but now I'm going to be here still Saturday, Sunday. Could we go ahead and get together after all? And so I guess, if somebody gave you a hard no and they're not interested, that's a little bit different.
Right.
But if you have people on they might be willing to get together, and I don't have any reason to believe they wouldn't outside of our schedules haven't connected yet, have that list ready. Treat it like a work trip. Don't just go to the museum and, sit on the beach or whatever else. Like, it's a work trip. And so when you're trying to fill out what you need support raising wise, work. And continue to try to follow up on those referrals. But meanwhile, even with some of your new referrals, that might be back from the beginning of our conversation, that might be a time to add a generation. That might be a time where it's like, hey, Charlie introduced me to you, and I'm only in town for a few days, but hey, who's one or two friends that you would say, if you can, try and get together with them in the next couple of days? You're not promising me they're going to join my team, but you think they might be interested in what I'm doing in Australia. And so if you kind of have that work ethic, I am here and I'm going to go for it to the best of my ability. Obviously, prayer is huge, and being spiritually healthy is bigger than any of this. But if you are walking with the Lord and also having that work ethic, I gotta believe that you're gonna see some success in at least being able to invite people to your team. Again, that's how we define, success in all of this. Are you giving great commission, vision casting invitations for people to be a part of what you're doing? If the answer is yes to that, praise the Lord. We're not gonna tie it into who said yes or no as to whether or not you're successful. Ultimately, over time, you got to have enough yeses to do what it is you're called to do. But I don't want people getting caught up in basing their definition of success on how many people said yes in the appointment the first time or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I want to point out a resource that not all of our listeners have probably read. If you're eager to work hard to develop a solid, faithful support team to undergird your ministry for the long haul, you might want to pick up a copy of the book called Viewpoints. It's compiled and authored by Steve Shadrack, and this book called Viewpoints is filled with encouraging case studies and anecdotes that will encourage you in the support-raising process. You can pick up Viewpoints at cmmpress.org, where you can receive a 10% discount if you use the code SRSPodcast.
Okay, so we've been talking about referrals and then the follow-up, and you asked me a little bit about doing it from overseas. Any other, because I know you and I can talk. We probably need to wrap this podcast soon. It's going to be one of our longer ones, but I'm okay with that. But I think this referral thing is it's a big deal. You and I both get a lot of questions about it on a regular basis. Any other thoughts or questions or maybe even wisdom you have on this topic that is worthy to consider?
I wanted to affirm what you just said about making it like a work trip. I think that a lot of times people, when they think of out-of-town trips, they think of, oh, it's a trip and I'll have some appointments while I'm there. And I think it really is important to view it as a work trip and to go all in with getting appointments. And about a year ago, I had a work trip to do fundraising, and I had a day and a half to get as many appointments as I can out of town. And I ended up getting to line up 5 appointments in a row in one day, which it's a lot of appointments to have in a day, especially out of town. But I was really thankful because on the phone, I asked people, I said, hey, I have a meeting at 9 a.m. at this place. I wasn't very familiar with the city I was in. So I asked them when they could meet and where we should meet. And they set up my day, and it was really awesome. And I actually, in that trip, had one couple say, yeah, we'll meet with you, but we've already started supporting other people. We can't come on your team, but we will meet with you. And then on the appointment actually tell me, we're probably not going to support you.
Right.
And I said, that's fine. If that's what you decide, can I call you in a couple of days just to see what you for sure decided? And she said, sure. They ended up coming on my team, which is really great. But I would just affirm to treat those trips as a work trip and try to get as many appointments as you can.
Yeah. Well, we would not call this a definitive answer about the whole get referrals and how to get referrals. I think that there's going to be more to come, more to talk about, more written, more discussed. And yeah, hopefully this is a podcast that really speaks to what I believe is a strongly felt need in the missions world, particularly for people who have already began the process of support raising and have plateaued or have needed to raise more, and now you're ready to learn more. This is kind of a next level, 201, 301 level support raising conversation. But C, you have been awesome in your answers and in your questions, and it's just a pleasure to have you sit down with me today. Thank you for being on the SRS podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aaron.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.